I would begin by directly posing the grand question: what is consciousness? Consciousness is described as both the most apparent and the most challenging subject to investigate. This is due to the fact that any attempt to study consciousness involves the use of consciousness itself, which creates a conceptual dilemma. The issue becomes even more complex because consciousness encompasses private, subjective experiences that cannot be shared or directly measured. One of the greatest challenges in studying consciousness is what philosopher David Chalmers termed the hard problem. This refers to the difficulty of explaining how and why subjective experiences arise from the brain's physical processes. Although cognitive sciences have made significant progress in understanding brain function, there remains an inexplicable gap between neural activity and conscious experiences. Another fascinating aspect is the theory that consciousness might be an illusion. This does not mean that consciousness does not exist, but rather that it is not what it seems. This perspective suggests that what we perceive as a conscious reality may merely be a product of complex unconscious processes. The central idea is that, although consciousness is an omnipresent and seemingly simple phenomenon, explaining it from a scientific or philosophical perspective is extremely complicated. There is a general consensus that there is no easy solution to the problem of consciousness, and fundamental questions about its nature remain open and challenging. Thus, to better understand it, we must first discuss a few details. Complexity of the human brain. The human brain is considered the most complex object in the known universe. Compared to other species, the human brain is significantly larger in proportion to body weight, weighing about 1.5 kilograms and containing over 1 billion neurons. These neurons are interconnected through numerous connections, forming a vast and complex network. From these connections emerge extraordinary abilities such as perception, learning, memory, reasoning, language, and in one way or another, consciousness. It is recognized that changes in the brain can cause alterations in consciousness. For example, drugs that affect brain function also modify subjective experiences. Stimulation of small areas of the brain can induce hallucinations, physical sensations, or emotional reactions, and brain damage can drastically affect a person's state of consciousness. Nevertheless, it remains a mystery why we should be conscious in the first place. In many ways, the brain does not seem designed to produce the type of consciousness we have. Although the brain functions as a distributed network, human consciousness appears to be unified. This unity of consciousness is described in 3 distinct ways. There is unity at a given moment, meaning that some things are in our consciousness while others are not. This forms the current content of experiences. Consciousness seems unified over time, existing continuously from one moment to another, or even throughout the entire conscious life. The content of consciousness is experienced by the same self. A viable theory of consciousness must explain the differences between conscious and unconscious brain activity. It must explain why certain neural processes lead to conscious experiences while others do not. This remains one of the greatest challenges in the study of consciousness. Libet's delay and the timing of consciousness. Neurophysiologist Benjamin Libet, through his experiments in the 1960s, discovered that there is a delay of approximately half a second between the moment the brain processes a stimulus and the moment it becomes aware of it. This suggests that consciousness may lag behind actual events in the world, raising questions about the nature of free will and moral responsibility. Libet conducted experiments in which he electrically stimulated the somatosensory cortex of patients undergoing surgery, causing the sensation of touch in parts of the body. He found that the stimulation had to last at least half a second for patients to be aware of the sensation. This finding was later confirmed through additional experiments that showed if cortex stimulation occurred before this interval expired, the sensation was masked and no longer perceived. He also proposed the concept of backward referral or subjective antedating, suggesting that when consciousness perceives a stimulus, it projects that perception backward in time to appear as if it occurred simultaneously with the actual stimulus. This means that conscious events are perceived as occurring without delay, even though, in reality, consciousness perceives them with a delay. Is consciousness an illusion? What do we mean by illusion? An illusion is described as a perception of something objectively existing in a way that leads to a misinterpretation of its true nature. This means that an illusion is not something non-existent, but something that is not as it appears. This definition is applied to understand how consciousness itself might be a grand illusion. Blackmore discusses the idea that our entire visual experience might be a grand illusion, a false perception of a rich and detailed stream of images. Psychologists Daniel Levin and Daniel Simons demonstrated that people are susceptible to inattentional blindness and change blindness, phenomena where observers fail to perceive obvious changes in visual scenes. These findings suggest that the detailed visual world we believe we see is merely an illusion created by the brain. Blackmore also explores the illusion of control, where people believe they have influenced events that are actually random. This phenomenon is common in gambling and may explain why people believe in the paranormal or supernatural interventions. Steven Pinker argues that the human tendency to attribute intentions to natural phenomena is a result of evolution, which equipped us with a mechanism for detecting agents that might pose a threat. Francis Crick and Antonio Damasio proposed that we should look for the movie in the brain, or vivid representations of the world in the brain. However, if the visual world is a grand illusion, then these representations do not exist as we imagine. Instead, consciousness and perceptions might be constructed from our actions and interactions with the world. Introducing the problem of the self. Who am I? This question reflects a profound existential and philosophical dilemma, as simple answers like, "I am my body" or "I am my brain" do not seem satisfactory. Although people feel that they possess a self, the concept of I is difficult to define from a scientific perspective. Modern science does not require the existence of an internal self that experiences what the brain does, as brain activity can be explained in terms of causality and neural processes. Philosopher Derek Parfit identified two major theories about the self, the ego theory and the bundle theory. The ego theory asserts that there is a continuous self that experiences life and exists beyond the physical body. This aligns with many religions and cultures that support the existence of a soul or spirit. In contrast, the bundle theory suggests that the self is not a unitary and continuous entity, but rather a collection of sensations and experiences linked together by memory and other relationships. This theory, influenced by philosopher David Hume, argues that there is no persistent self and that the sense of continuity is an illusion created by the mind. While most religions, such as Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism, support the existence of a soul or spirit, modern science has failed to detect a distinct spiritual entity separate from the brain. This presents a major problem, as if such a self exists, it should be scientifically detectable. A notable exception is Buddhism, which rejects the idea of a permanent self. Buddha taught that human suffering is caused by ignorance, particularly attachment to the false notion of self. Instead of a permanent self, Buddhism posits that everything is interdependent and that the self is merely an illusion. This perspective suggests that the self is nothing more than a convenient convention for referring to a set of experiences and actions. In a thought experiment on teleportation to explore people's beliefs about identity, the following scenario is presented. A person can be scanned, destroyed, and recreated in another location with all memories and characteristics intact. The dilemma is whether the recreated person is the same as the original or if a new self has been created. This experiment highlights the difficulties in defining personal identity and the continuity of the self. What about cases of multiple personality disorder, where a person seems to manifest multiple distinct personalities, each with its own traits and memories? Psychologist William James suggested that such cases demonstrate that a brain can support multiple independent consciousnesses. This raises questions about the unity of consciousness and the nature of the self, suggesting that the self might be more fragmented than we might imagine. Introducing the problem of free will. People tend to believe that their actions result from conscious decisions. However, this assumption has been questioned by numerous philosophers and scientists, including David Hume, who called the problem of free will the most contentious question of metaphysics. Benjamin Libet's 1985 experiment investigated the timing of conscious awareness of a decision. Libet found that there is a readiness potential in the brain approximately 300 milliseconds before the person becomes aware of the decision to act. This suggests that decisions are initiated by unconscious processes before the person becomes aware of them. Critics argued that this experiment cannot be generalized to all actions, but Libet responded that consciousness plays an important role through conscious veto, the ability to stop an action before it is executed, even if it cannot initiate the action. Blackmore also discusses the illusion of control, where people believe they have influenced external events when, in fact, these events were random. This phenomenon is common in the context of gambling and can explain why people believe in the paranormal or supernatural phenomena. Compatibilists argue that free will and determinism can coexist because certain deterministic processes are so complex that their outcomes cannot be predicted, leaving room for human choices. However, other philosophers argue that if all events are determined by prior causes, then free will does not truly exist. Psychologist Daniel Wegner argues that the illusion of conscious will arises because people make a fundamental error in judging the causality of their actions. He suggests that although our brains initiate actions and generate thoughts about those actions, there is no direct causal relationship between thoughts and actions. Thus, the feeling that our conscious thoughts cause actions is an illusion. Sleep and dreams. All people dream, even if some claim they do not. Research shows that these non-dreamers simply do not remember their dreams. During a typical night's sleep, the brain cycles through multiple stages of non-REM sleep, followed by REM, rapid eye movement stages. During REM sleep, people typically report dreaming, while in non-REM sleep, they may describe static thoughts or images. The capacity for complex and vivid dreams develops along with cognitive abilities and imagination. As people approach death, they sometimes report a series of unusual experiences, collectively known as near-death experiences, NDEs. These typically include sensations of traveling through a dark tunnel, encounters with beings of light or deceased persons, and feelings of peace or joy. After such experiences, many individuals report changes in attitude, becoming less selfish and less fearful of death. Although there are cultural variations, the overall structure of NDEs is remarkably consistent. Altered states of consciousness are an important part of the human experience and can be induced through various means, from meditation and hypnosis to drugs and extreme physiological conditions. However, these states remain difficult to define and measure, and their full understanding is still a subject of intense research and debate. How might conscious experience be for other animals, such as a beetle, birds, or snakes? The essential question is, what does it mean to be conscious? This question relates to the concept of animal consciousness, which refers to the degree and nature of consciousness in other species, as well as when and how consciousness evolved. Some theories propose that consciousness arose with life itself, while others link it to the evolution of perception, intelligence, or other general abilities. Some researchers believe that language, imitation, or memes, culturally transmitted ideas or behaviors, played a crucial role in the development of consciousness. An influential theory proposed by psychologist Nicholas Humphrey suggests that consciousness evolved in our ancestors because they were highly social animals with complex alliances and relationships. Individuals who could best predict others' actions would have had an advantage, and the best way to do this would have been to develop an inner eye for self-observation. Thus, the ability to introspect evolved, leading to consciousness. This theory emphasizes social intelligence and the origins of the theory of mind, but it has been criticized for suggesting that introspection is not a good guide for behavior and that the theory does not explain subjectivity. Another possibility is that consciousness is not an adaptation in itself, but rather an inseparable byproduct of other evolved abilities, such as intelligence, perception, thought, self-concept, language, or other advanced abilities. This view is adopted by many materialist scientists who believe that when all these abilities are explained, we will ultimately understand consciousness. A provocative concept is that of philosophical zombies, creatures physically and behaviorally identical to humans but lacking consciousness. The idea of zombies is used to argue that consciousness is an optional extra, an unnecessary byproduct or epiphenomenon. However, this concept is rejected because, by definition, zombies are indistinguishable from conscious beings, making it impossible for natural selection to operate on them. While there are many theories about the evolution of consciousness, none are universally accepted, and there is no clear consensus. The fact that consciousness is so difficult to explain suggests that there may be a fundamental problem in how we think about it. We may need to abandon our basic assumptions and re-examine our concepts to make significant progress in understanding consciousness. In contemplating the nature of consciousness and its myriad manifestations, one might ponder not just the origins or mechanisms, but also the purpose or absence thereof. Perhaps consciousness is not a destination, but an ongoing journey, an evolving dance of perception and introspection, ever elusive and yet intimately familiar. It may be that in the act of seeking answers, we find ourselves enmeshed in a larger narrative that transcends individual understanding, a narrative that speaks to the interconnectedness of all conscious beings. In this light, consciousness could be seen not as a puzzle to be solved, but as an experience to be embraced, a testament to the profound and mysterious nature of existence itself. Thus, as we explore the depths of our awareness, we might come to realize that the journey is, in itself, a rich and fulfilling experience, hinting at an understanding that goes beyond the need for definitive answers.